New Level Cap podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
I therefore dub thee Sir Chris Solis, co-host of this episode of the New Level Cap podcast. I, Marco DeSantos, also known as Mechanic Critic, therefore give you the power of Chivalry.
I have been knighted.
Shovel Knighted.
I have been shovel knighted.
Oh my gosh. So, this is what we've been teasing for since forever. Chris?
So, we have the next season of Exceed is Shovel Knight Exceed. And it's been a long time coming. We've had a few hiccups, but along with Shovel Knight, we've really taken Exceed and reformatted it, and we're really looking forward to consistent releases and a lot of little changes for this series overall. So, Shovel Knight is the beginning of that process.
Yeah. So Season 4 is going to be Shovel Knight. Season 5 is going to be Shrek, of course.
Season 5 is Shrek.
Yes. Season 6 is obviously...
Emoji Movie.
And finally, when we get to Season 7, we will reach the much coveted...
Sonic live-action Hedgehog Exceed.
Exactly. Sonic the live-action Hedgehog movie. Actually, now that I have you here on this podcast, actually, can I implore you that Season 8 be Jim Carrey Exceed? Since we already have Jim Carrey in Sonic live-action movie, right? Might as well add everything. Let's put in The Mask, Ace Ventura. I don't know.
You know, someone literally told me that earlier today. Like you should put Jim Carrey Exceed. I'm like, dude, I don't know where that stems from, but that is a thing, I guess. I don't know what meme I'm missing out on.
It would actually be lit if Jim Carrey was just in Exceed. Like, the man himself, the myth, the legend. But you know what? Future seasons of Exceed aside, let's talk about the current season of Exceed. Let's talk about Shovel Knight. So, Chris, how excited are you about this partnership between Level 99 Games and Yacht Club Games?
So I'm going to answer that, but first let me tell you about some general season Exceed changes. So one thing that we've done is we changed all the card backs. So now characters have unique card backs that are themed to the character. So it's pretty nice that every character has their own card back. It also makes cleanup really easy. We're also committing to a maximum of 16 fighters per season, and we're going to do 2 seasons a year. So with that schedule and with that character limit, we can guarantee consistent Exceed releases, and we're really excited about that. We also
wait a minute. Does that mean that Shovel Knight's going to be releasing before the end of this year?
Yes, that's correct. Ooh. It's scheduled for Q4 unless a boat sinks in the ocean. That's what's going to happen. So, yeah.
Oh, man. Hype. Q4 for Shovel Knight Season 4. I guess that's accurate. 444.
That's the thing. But you know how board games is. Sometimes, like, a boat actually does sink, and then you have to get delayed. But it is planned for Q4, and the game's going to press, Friday? So we're on super track for that to be accurate.
Yeah. A lot of care has gone into balancing these characters, and it's been a big endeavor, but we're fine. We've gotten through it, and these characters are really fun. I can talk a little bit more about the design process behind those characters, but what other new season things are there? Let's talk about 4 specials? Ooh.
Yeah, so we're introducing this as a quote-unquote season mechanic, but not really. Shovel Knight doesn't really have a season mechanic, but this mechanic being introduced to Exceed overall. So you'll see it in Shovel Knight and as a normal thing moving forward, and that's 4 specials. So basically, characters have special cards that on reveal, you pay a force cost. So by adding the force cost to these specials, we opened the design space a little bit. So we can have some fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely true, because the thing about it is that 4 specials... So for people who want to get into the nitty-gritty mechanics of all of it, is that 4 specials are basically like ultras, but not as good as ultras, right? But they're stronger than regular specials. So
I would guess they are stronger, but it's not like, hey, they have more power and you're going to die now. They're more like, hey, now we can do this interesting thing because this card has a higher power budget, and it allowed us to introduce some of the mechanics we're going to talk about when we talk about specific characters later in the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. But some of them are just literally just better, right? Like Plague Knight has a card called Long Pitch, which is basically just Like, it's a super dive at that point.
Mhm.
So it's just better than dive. Like, in 90% of the situations, you would want to dive anyway. So, yeah, but the thing about it is that force specials are really good because, again, they give you that extra power budget on those cards at the cost of force, of course, but also because they kind of function like ultras. So if you wild swing into a force special, you can invalidate that force special, right?
Yeah.
And that gives you a lot of extra utility when you're wild swinging. And that's pretty good, especially because some force specials are really, really powerful. And sometimes they're just not good at certain ranges, so you can get rid of them. So it makes Shovel Knights a little bit better at wild swinging than your average character. But of course, they have a force cost associated with them. So if they're the last card in your hand and you have no gauge, literally does nothing. So there you go.
Yeah, so that can be a little rough. But again, every Shovel Knight character has a force special. But you may see force special again in future seasons in addition to that season's mechanic.
Yeah. And force specials are pretty good. Some characters interact with them really interestingly. I think Chris is going to talk about a few of them later on in the podcast. I will talk about one of them now since he's not going to get talked about. But Treasure Knight's ability allows him to essentially generate one free force every time he has to pay force during a strike. Well, force specials happen during a strike, so his force special is actually just free. So, yeah, it's cute interactions like that are really fun with this new season. And I feel like fans of Season 2 will kind of get some of that back, right? Like, they like the intricate, like, oh, my thing combos with this thing, which means that I can do this other thing, right? That's a lot of that's actually in Season 4. So people who missed that when they played Season 3 will start seeing that once more.
Yeah, and also going back to your first question, like working with Yacht Club has been awesome. They're expanding Shovel Knight a lot. By the time this airs, I think they would have just completed a huge announcement. And we're glad that Shovel Knight Exceed was one of the things that began that discussion. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, the Yacht Club's pretty awesome. And I'm excited that Shovel Knight is basically the modern Mega Man. So seeing it continue to grow is really exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited too. I've actually, what's your history with Shovel Knight or like Yacht Club games in general? Because I backed the Kickstarter for the original Shovel Knight, and I'm just really excited to actually be working with this property. I really love Shovel Knight. I mean, not to the point that I make fan art of it, right? But I really love playing the games. I finished all 3 of the currently released campaigns, which is Shovel of Hope, Plague of Shadows, and Specter of Torment. All really, really fun characters to play as, and one of the cool things that I feel like happened with this season of Exceed, so let's move over onto the development side a little bit, is that this is actually the first season where we had to adapt an IP that wasn't already a fighting card game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we had Red Horizon, which was from UFS, or Ultimate Fighting System, right?
Yeah.
And in UFS, these characters already had attacks, and they already had fighting game patterns on them, right? So it's kind of easy to translate them. Season 2 was easy to translate because we literally got to make everything from the ground up. Season 3, even easier because, like, you can't make a Ryu character and not give him Hadouken, Tatsu, and Shoryu, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to put those 3. So those cards were kind of pre-made for us, right? And, like, we know what a Shoryu does. We know the frame data of a Shoryu. So it's not like we had to create stats from nothing, right? We had, like, a reference. Shoryus are unsafe on block, and they are high priority. That's all you need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Ryu's Shoryuken is melee, deals not a lot of damage, but is fast.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Well, yeah, this being able to design these characters from the ground up opened a massive amount of design space, and I think it really allowed us to push the Exceed systems to the max. So some of these characters are wild and really cool.
Yeah, and one big difference with Season 4 is that we didn't actually design them from the ground up, now did we? Because at the end of the day, we didn't design them from the ground up because we're trying to adapt existing characters that we don't own. Right?
Oh, yes,
because in season 2, right, we designed everything literally from the ground up. Like, if we wanted Minato to just have an attack that said summon a train, we could just make him summon a train, right? Yeah. But we can't do that with Shovel Knight, right? If we wanted Shovel Knight to have an attack that's like throw a fireball, we can't do that because Shovel Knight doesn't throw fireballs, right?
We have their identity which we need to adapt. And
I mean, that was a unique challenge, right? Because in designing it, it was really hard because not only are these characters that already exist, they're also characters that aren't fighting game characters. They're platformer characters. So how do you adapt their mobility? How do you adapt their verticality to their playstyles, right? Like, because a character like Polar Knight is definitely not going to be as mobile as, I don't know, Propeller Knight, who can literally fly, right? So we had to adapt those things that aren't always necessarily fighting game things and adapt them into the season. And I feel like that was a unique design challenge that we had to go through. But overall, I think the season is much better for that design challenge.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of really fresh ideas here.
Yeah.
So, we can talk about those characters now.
Well, let's talk about them after we come back from a short break. So, Chris, take us to the break.
All right. We are going to go dig for some jewels, and we'll be back after we find some.
All right. Be right back.
Professor Treasure's Secret Sky Castle is on sale for only $5. Infiltrate the magical mansion and use your wit to come home with the most precious loot. This deal lasts only until August 30th, so get it now by clicking the link in the description.
And we're back.
Guess who's back? Back again. Chris is back. I'm his friend. Hi.
I see this is how we became friends. We didn't talk about a friendship until this moment, so now we're friends.
Oh, now we're friends?
Yeah.
So we weren't friends prior to that song.
No, let me go add you on Facebook now real quick.
All right, that's Chris and Marco's friendship song now. But it's fine. So this is going to be really interesting in the second half of the podcast. If you notice that the first half was a bit short, it's because the second half is going to be a long doozy. So Chris and I have selected 3 characters from the season each that we want to kind of talk about a little bit. I mean, we do all of the characters, but that's too much for an episode of the podcast. So I've decided to pick my top 3. Chris has picked his top 3. And then we'll go from... So I'll say my third pick, you say your third pick, I'll say my second pick, you say your second pick, so on and so forth, right?
Okay.
And if people want to hear about the other characters, well, I guess you're going to have to wait for maybe a future episode of the podcast. So do you want to start with your number 3, Chris, or do you want me to start with my number 3?
I'll start.
All right. Who's your number 3?
So my number 3 is Shovel and Shield Knight. So the first question is, we already have a Shovel Knight solo fighter. Is that fighter replicated in this season? I get that a lot, and the answer is no. So to make Shovel Knight different in this season, you fight with Shovel and Shield Knight as a duo on the board.
So you're a puppet character, essentially.
Exactly. Completely different than the pre-existing just Shovel Knight standalone character. The way it works is Shovel Knight's on the board, and so is Shield Knight. You can both occupy her space. And based on her positioning, you get fun things. Like one of the more passive things is if she's between you and your opponent, you get armor bonuses because she's Shield Knight, right?
Yeah. So, well, that's only on your Exceed side, right?
It's on the Exceed side, so
yeah. So one of the bigger things is when Shovel Knight starts moving when he's on Shield Knight's space, he gets to move extra spaces because he's like bouncing off of Shield Knight's shield, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else about this character that you're really excited about? Why is he your number 3? Why are they your number 3?
Oh man, I mean, so some attacks resolve from Shield Knight, and because of that, you can end up with some hilariously disjointed things, like Shield Boomerang. It gets calculated from Shield Knight's range. It hits 2 to 4, and you can just cover so much space. And if they're within that range, then their attack misses. Period. So you can really set up situations that are pretty unwinnable for the opponent if you get the right setup, and you get the teamwork between these two really going.
Feels more like Shield Knight is actually a partner you're playing with, and that's really cool. So yeah, definitely. My number 3 is Propeller Knight.
Why is your number 3 Propeller Knight?
So Propeller Knight is very interesting because in the game, right, Propeller Knight kind of acts and fights like he's a fencer, right? He's darting in and out. He has a rapier. He's basically a flying fencer. So we've adapted that by kind of giving him this ability of tippers. So he's like Marth from Smash. He has tippers. So when you hit your opponent and then they're at the maximum range of your attack, you deal bonus damage. So that's really cool because he's a very spacing-focused character. You care about which specific space you are, not just whether or not you'll hit. Right? And that's really awesome. So he has some attacks that are like range 3 to 4. And hitting them at range 3 is good, but hitting them at range 4 is more powerful and awesomer. And I really like Propeller Knight's Exceed side. because Propeller Knight is one of the few characters in the entire game, not just this season, but the entire game, that has a 2-gauge exceed cost. And when a character has a 2-gauge exceed cost in exceed design, that often means you have to exceed with this character. Like, there's no world where you don't exceed with this character when you're playing them, right?
Yeah.
And Propeller Knight's exceed is very powerful because you can now, so you still have the tipper, but as an action, you can move 1 space, then strike. That's really good because it essentially allows you to space the opponent and attack them and get your tippers all in one action. So Propeller Knight goes from being this fencing tipper character to essentially what is like the ultimate rushdown, because you'll never be able to get away from him, and if he wants to, he can space you, and it's just really, really cool that whenever you strike, you get to move before striking, and then you get rewarded for tipping them in the same go. So something along the lines of like, your opponent's at range 4, you play an attack that has a maximum range of 3, but you use your unique ability to move in 1, then you hit them at tipper range. It's really, really cool. So that's why Propeller Knight's one of my favorites.
That's awesome. Seems like a classy guy.
I mean, he's a pretty classy guy. One of his boosts is that he throws a rose at you. How could that not be awesome?
That is awesome.
All right. Who's your number 2, Chris?
So this one's wild. This is my favorite for the wild factor. So Tinker Knight. Tinker Knight is unlike any other Exceed character, period. So when you start off as Tinker Knight, he has a smaller health pool, and his boosts are stupid expensive. They're like, 4 gauge? 4 force, right? And he generally seems weak at first, but once you do exceed, and you can exceed at any point, depending on how much gauge you had when you exceeded, you'll gain a bunch of health, and then your attacks, quote-unquote, combine. So when I play this attack, when I resolve it, I will resolve it as if the boost on that card is attached. And what I also do is I take out a 3-space tank card and put it into play. So basically, Tinker Knight fights on his own, and then exceeds into his tank form that takes up 3 actual spaces on the board, and all my cards are completely fundamentally different. Because now I'm resolving both the boost and the attack at the same time combined.
Yeah, so if you, for example, you have an attack that's like, I don't know, that has a boost that says power +2, now when you play that card as an attack, you don't even have to boost with that part of the card. You just get that power +2 when you play that card as an attack, right?
Exactly. And even then, before you exceed, even though the boosts are like crazy expensive, they're really powerful.
Cost 3 each.
Yeah, they cost 3 each, and you can still play them and come up with some like hilarious combos. You can put out all this power onto this super sweep or a super spike. So you can tinker things together like that, even though they're expensive. Just make sure you get into your tank. Now the tank's positioning is interesting because it takes up so much space that it basically reduces the effectiveness of your opponent's range massively in their movement. And their long distance attacks will be, for the most part, nullified because they can't run. So you can use that to your advantage. Of course, you're also huge and probably going to get hit every single turn. So when you do go to tank mode, you need to make sure you're ready to steamroll.
And one thing I want to say that people might not be imagining right now when Chris said you effectively make the board smaller by your big size. If you take up 3 spaces, right? We have a 9-space board, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you take up 3 spaces and you are in the dead center of the board, which means there's 3 empty spaces, 3 spaces that are you, and then 3 other empty spaces, it means your opponent can't even cross to evade your attacks anymore.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
Yeah.
Because no matter where they are on the board, they will be at most range 3 from your big boy. So all your sweeps become safe, and Tinker actually has multiple sweep likes in his deck, and multiple assault likes in his deck. So he actually abuses that real hard, making him really, really fun.
Yeah. And as the defender, you want to harass him as much as possible during his build phase, because the Tinker player needs both sides to be successful. You don't just build some jank tank that gets swept and just explodes,
Yeah.
But seriously, it comes with a huge card, so that's fun. The way the asset for it works is that you actually get 2 copies of it. So in your tuck box, you get 3 cards in which you can place out, so you can put them in your tuck box, and it fits in there. But you also get an actually 3-space size card. That won't fit in your tuck box, but it does come with the game, so you can use that if you'd like.
Yeah. And honestly, it's really good. I really like the fact that he's literally physically a big boy. We were really shocked when this was introduced to us. We were like, how does that work? So, Chris, I'm going to ask you a series of common rules questions with new Tinker Knight, because this is a common problem with a lot of people when they first saw the fact that he was 3 spaces wide. So let's talk about some common rules questions, and let's see whether or not you know the answers to them, all right?
Mhm.
Number 1. So, I tried to use the move action to switch sides with Tinker Knight. Does that cost me like 4 force, because he's 2 extra spaces larger than the average character?
No, still only costs 2 force. You pay force to cross up your opponent.
So it doesn't matter how big the opponent is,
Nope.
so long as you cross up the opponent, it only costs 2.
That's right.
All right. So what happens if the opponent, say, is like 1 space away from the corner? So there's only 1 space behind the opponent now, right?
Mhm.
And I play an attack that, say, like advances me past them, like dive. So there's not enough space for me to fit. What happens?
So you act like you hit the wall. You basically don't move. So if you don't fit, you don't move.
Uh-huh. Okay. That makes sense. Last question. I'm 3 spaces wide. If I'm at range 1 from my opponent and they play an attack with range 2 to 3, say spike, do I still get hit even if I'm at range 1?
You do. You occupy space 1, 2, and 3 simultaneously. So yeah, he hits your back tire.
Ooh. So I'm going to get spiked all the time, aren't I?
Yeah, Spike is massively buffed against Tinker. So yeah, that's one thing, yeah.
And there you go. So those are some common Tinker Knight questions. Is there anything else you want to say about your second pick before we move on to before we move on to my second pick?
No, I think that's it for Tinker. I look forward to what people think about him. He's really unique. So Marco, tell us about your second pick.
Well, my second pick is going to be Specter Knight, the edgy boy that everybody loves who is edgy. Specter Knight's really interesting because he has a very unique mechanic, which kind of accentuates his rushdown identity. So Specter Knight's a rushdown character in Exceed. His entire gimmick is that he can choose to seal cards in his hand face down, and then that gives whatever attack he's playing advance 2 spaces. So it essentially turns all of his attacks into pseudo dive assaults.
Okay.
So you're playing a grasp at range 3, I can seal 2 of my cards, and then suddenly my grasp now advances 2, so I can hit you from range 3 with my grasp. Really powerful. Of course, he runs out of cards in his hand real fast as a result.
Mm-hmm.
But you might be wondering, why are we sealing the cards face down? Chris, why does sealing the card face down matter?
So Spectre has boosts, which allow him to play those sealed cards again later. So you can always keep him guessing.
It's really, really interesting, right?
Oh.
And it's really fun because what you can essentially do is Spectre essentially has 2 hands, right? His real hand and then his seal pile, which is essentially a second hand that your opponent can't interrupt or disrupt, right?
Think of it this way. I mean, in Exceed, the game for the most part is public information with the exception of your deck and your hand. This is the only character that has another hidden zone. So when people look at your discard and you're like, oh, okay, you don't have any more grasps, they have no idea, you know?
Yeah.
So
they wouldn't know. Like, you could easily just seal. And that's the thing, right? Like, if you seal, say, a bunch of normals into your seal pile, and then your opponent goes, oh, I'll reading your entire hand so I can see it, and then you just show them your hand, and they're like, there are no normals here, but they don't know that all your normals are in your seal pile, right? So It's really, really interesting. And the thing about it is that Spectre actually has a lot of cards that give him advantage. He has a good 2 cards that do it.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can actually do is put them all in your seal pile and essentially turn into Reese for like 4 turns, where you can go strike from seal, advantage, strike from seal, advantage, strike from seal, advantage. It's really fun. And it's really hard to interrupt, especially if your opponent runs out of cards, right? So Spectre has a lot of cool gameplay to him, and I'll talk about one of my favorite cards on his kit. He has a card called Dread Reaper or something like that. Dread Reaper, which is a range 3, power 10, speed 3 ultra. That's bonkers. Because you just whack them real hard and then they die.
Then they die.
Then they die.
But
it also gives you advantage. It's really good.
It is slow, though. So what's your go-to setup for that?
So the go-to setup for that is really simple, right? Because remember, you have your unique ability that causes you to advance too,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at range 3, a speed 3 attack is kind of bad. But at range 5, a speed 3 attack is pretty good. So what you can do is go to range 5, then play your Dread Reaper, and then use your unique ability to advance 2 spaces, and then whack your opponent still. It's really good. So all in all, Spectre is a really fun character. Lots of vantage chains, and you really feel like the character in the game, in the playable Shovel Knight game. Because in that Shovel Knight game, you're like...
Yeah, just comboing and slicing through everything.
Yeah, you're literally slicing through everything, flying through everything, and in this one, you're moving a lot, you're slicing through everything. It's really fun. So, Chris, who's your number one?
All right, well, my number one has got to be the Enchantress, the main villain. So she's really cool. First of all, I just love her art. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
2, she is able to say, I basically have infinite force. Because when your hand is depleted, you can use her character ability to just draw a new hand. So her whole thing is, I basically draw new hands and don't care about force. And she uses that mechanic in interesting ways to power up her spells. She has abilities that look at players' hands and interact in those ways. And because her boosts, it's not that they don't cost force, they do. Because she has infinite force, we got to do some interesting design choices with the boost. And she's just really out there. She feels really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, she is the boss, right?
Yeah, and when I say really powerful, I mean like the sensation of, I have infinite force in this huge hand is the feeling that character perpetuates.
Yeah, it kind of feels like sometimes she's insurmountable, right? Because a lot of people kind of rely on the fact that their opponent has to draw cards at some point to give them space and time. Mm-hmm. Enchantress doesn't do that. She doesn't give you the time. She just keeps drawing cards ad infinitum. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about the boost, I really like that because you were talking about how we got some interesting design decisions. So let's talk a little bit about Exceed design, right? In Exceed, boosts actually usually exist as a form of card economy. If you look at a boost, say like Cross's run boost, it allows you to advance 3 spaces. But that's literally something you could do just by spending 3 force to move the same amount of spaces, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why by playing the run boost, all you're really doing is saving yourself 2 cards, right? Because you spend 1 card instead of spending 3 to perform the same action. Mm-hmm. Enchantress doesn't care about force. She has infinity of it. Yeah. So giving her boosts that are like, advance 3 spaces, these aren't useful to her because Enchantress will just go, but I could just spend my entire hand and then draw a new hand entirely. So why bother with this boost, right?
Yeah.
That's why Enchantress gets a lot of wacky, strange boosts. Like, I don't know, list one of them that you like.
So let me tell you one. Critical attack. Any other character had this, it would be awful. Well, because she has infinite force, this is interesting. So for 2 force, a continuous boost, this is hit. The opponent must draw or discard cards until they have the same number as in hand as you, plus 1 power per card drawn, not discarded this way. So, like, that's wild, right? You can hit them really hard.
Why would you ever want to give your opponent cards?
Exactly. Like, in a way, I mean, if they have no hand, you can draw a lot. It's actually devastating to force them to draw 7 cards. Like, even just that alone, not even the damage, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're thinking to yourself, oh, then I won't have any cards in my hand because I spend this Ultra and then I spend 2 force to play this boost, right? Mm. But remember, Enchantress, when she runs out of cards in hand, instantly draws like 6 new cards. Mm-hmm. So if you had exactly 2 other cards and this Ultra critical attack boost in your hand, you can play it, spend the last 2 cards in your hand, and then draw up to 6 immediately. Mm-hmm. It's insane.
2 force Dark Strafe. Move to any space, teleport, then draw or discard up to 3 cards. Like you can strategically refresh your hand or not, right? So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, and on any other character, that card would be broken, right? Mm-hmm. It would be like nuts. But because it's on Enchantress, she doesn't actually care about that draw or discard 3, right? Like, why would anybody ever discard 3 cards? Well, Enchantress might want to, because she might have 3 cards left in her hand, and if she discards those 3, she can refill her hand with new cards, or if she likes those 3 cards, she can just draw 3 new cards to go up to 6. Yeah. So it's a very interesting set of decisions, right? Mm-hmm.
There are a couple other cards. Like, I like Homing Orb. Its range is X, it's an attack, and its range is number of up to the amount of cards in your hand. So if you have a huge hand, it has huge range. If you have a small hand, it doesn't. And you have control over that. It's just this fluctuating thing that's really interesting. Now, here's the thing, though. You might deck yourself. However,
that's true.
So you got to watch out for that. But when you do exceed, you get a free reshuffle. It doesn't take your 1 reshuffle per game. So you can essentially play a card 3 times per game. And that's something that no other character can do. That's just, I want to do this card a 3rd time, a 4th time. You can.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah, so she essentially has 2 copies of, let's say, light or sweep, right? She has 2 copies of sweep. She plays those, then she does her free reshuffle on Exceed. She plays those again, and then she does her real reshuffle. She plays those again, right?
Mhm.
It's just a lot of cards. She gets to play a lot of the same cards over and over again, which is a lot of her power budget, actually.
Yeah, it is. Just make sure you don't get murdered before you Exceed, because then you get decked out. So,
yeah, you get decked out. I think the big deal about Enchantress is that she has a lot of cards, but she actually doesn't do a lot with her cards. You know what I mean? It's like her cards don't translate into a ton of extra damage. They usually just translate to like bonus range or bonus defense, right? Like Enchantress doesn't actually hurt a lot. Like critical attack is her scariest power boost, but almost none of her other cards give her bonus power. And most of the time, Enchantress is hitting you for 3 or 4 damage. And comparing that to something like Carl, who can shoot for 8 damage sweeps whenever he wants, or 7 damage power shortages. Enchantress actually has a lot less to work with in terms of power, and that's kind of her balancing factor. Like, she has infinite force, but she has to hit you a lot to kill you.
Yeah, she's awesome. So, yeah, I'm done. So, what's your number 1 pick?
My number 1 pick is obviously the one, the only, King Knight. Bow before me, my servants. It is I, the King Knight.
Is that so? Is that because you actually like King Knight, or is that because Yacht Club's new DLC where you play as King Knight?
Little column A, little column B. So the thing about King Knight is that King Knight has been my favorite member of the Order of No Quarter, ever since I played the original Shovel Knight game. Because here's the thing: he's not actually a king.
So he's like DDD.
Kinda, no, but he's not actually a king. He is not a knight who is a king. He is a king-themed knight, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Like so it's kind of like how Treasure Knight is a like undersea water explorer themed knight. King Knight is a king-themed knight. He is not actually a king.
Man, what a poser.
Isn't it awesome? That's really, yeah, he's essentially the ultimate poser. I really like that theme. He's really funny. He's my favorite character of all the bosses, right? And I really like the way we've implemented him in the thing. So in the season of like the new DLC for Shovel Knight, one of the key designs for the King of Cards, which is what the name of the DLC is, where you play as King Knight, is that King Knight kind of has this pay-to-win vibe to him. He can use money to augment himself. And other characters, they use money to buy equipment and stuff. Like King Knight can actually spend money on a lot of other things, like building a base or whatever. So money is a big thing for King Knight, right? Because he is a king, after all. We kind of adapted that mechanic into King Knight's Royal Decree mechanic, where King Knight has 4 unique cards that exist outside of his deck. Then he can choose to boost with those cards, and they're basically broken, ? So he has a boost that's like, now advance 1 or 2 spaces, you gain +2 power and +2 armor. That's really good. And then because they're royal decrees and not regular boosts, they're untechable. So if your opponent's like, I'll tech that, you're like, you can't actually tech it. It's an untechable boost. So King Knight is guaranteed to always have his decrees up, and it combos really well with his unique ability, which is that every time King Knight resolves a continuous boost, he draws cards. So now you're incentivized into this game plan of, I boost my attack, I keep drawing more cards, and then I whack you in the face with my powerful attack. So he literally spends money to gain money, you know, kind of like an investment banker. It's really cool. I really like it because it feels like you're cheating all the time. It's essentially what you're doing. Like, I pay 3 force to activate this powerful effect that when I hit you causes you to discard 2 cards, and then I draw 3 cards, and then you take 8 damage. Like, then your opponent just sits there and goes,
"Did you just make up the rules?" But just to be clear, those they seal themselves, and you get 4 of them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you only get 4 of them, and each one of them you can only use once, right?
Yeah.
So you got to make it count.
So it's really about timing when you want to do your busted attack, and you can't just do them all the time. So I think that's really the strategy, which is really cool.
Yeah. And the core of the King Knight matchup is basically when your opponent blocks, right? Your opponent has 2 copies of block per deck, and then 4 if they reshuffle. But it's all about understanding when your opponent has or doesn't have the blocks, right? Because none of King Knight's attacks actually ignore armor. So if the opponent finds a window and blocks your OP attack, you're depressed. You're sad.
You're
like
sad.
you've spent so much investment in your attack, and then they don't take any damage.
That's
not a good trade.
That's painful. So, yeah, King Knight loses the shield. But yeah, like you said, if you can poke through, that's it. So I actually like him a lot too. He's really cool. He's a lot of fun. I like his wacky decree art where he's like doing the strut and the cape flip.
Yeah, I really like the one that's called military spending, which internally we decided to call pay to win. Because it's a 4-cost boost, so that's a lot of investment, right? 4 cost, like we were saying that Tinker's boosts cost a lot at 3. This one costs 4. And the thing about it is that it's just art of him with a bag of money and then whacking a dude with it. It's the best freaking art ever. Oh, and by the way, before people start wondering, like, oh my gosh, 4 cost is a lot. If you really think about it, before we end this one, if you really think about it, a boost costs 1 force to play, even if that boost says it costs no force to play. Have you ever thought about that, Chris?
You mean because the card in your hand?
Because it's a card in your hand. You get it. So, for example, I play Light, which is a 0-cost boost that gives me +2 speed. I lost a card in hand. That's essentially 1 force worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, number 1, your decrees are not cards in your hand, so you don't actually lose a card in your hand. So if you really think about it, that 4-cost boost is actually now only 3 cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
But wait, there's more. King Knight's ability says that if you resolve a continuous boost, which all of your decrees are continuous boosts, you draw a card. So you actually draw a card for just boosting that thing. So from costing 3, it now only costs 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how the economics of it works. King Knight doesn't actually spend 4 entire force for the effect, but he does have to spend his options, right? Because he has to still spend the cards in his hand to pay for the effect. So even if he draws cards to compensate, if you have a really nice hand, you might have to begrudgingly get rid of one of your good cards just to get the effect online, right? Because you don't know what the card you're going to draw from your deck is. Yeah. So there you go. That's King Knight. I'm excited for him. He's my main.
Let's go.
Let's go.
So, yeah, those are some character previews. We're going to be doing a blog series, and we're going to go through every single character in detail in the coming weeks. And we're also going to have VODs of these characters fighting each other all the way up to the game finally ships at the end of quarter 4. So, yeah, we have a lot of interesting Shovel Knight content coming out.
Yeah, and you know what? You know what else is going to be very interesting? The end of this podcast. Because, unfortunately, Chris, as much as I would love to talk about the remaining 4 characters, we don't have more time, so we have to end this podcast begrudgingly.
I'm sad.
You're sad? You're sad? Is that your sad Chris sound?
Yeah, really, I was only birthed to talk about Shovel Knight to the moment I die. So.
I see. All right, that's okay. Whoa there. That's a heavy piece to unload, but let's unload that at the end of this podcast. So, as usual, that's been me, your host, Mark DeSantos, also known as the Mechanic Rig, and with me has been my amazing co-host, the producer of Exceed himself,
Chris Solis, also known as GC Fox.
What does GC Fox stand for?
GameCube.
And Fox as in Fox McCloud?
Yeah.
Filthy Smash player. Filthy Smash player. So if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend, and if you hate it, share it with an enemy. Don't forget your special action, and thank you, World of Shovel Knight. Thank you, and good night.
Happy gaming.
The new Level Cap podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday for more design talk and shenanigans. Thank you for listening.